Today, everyone agrees that America needs to build again. Factories, roads, rail, energy infrastructure, industry clusters, and yes, cities. And yet, building bold, big, and fast, once so quintessentially American, some fear has become a thing of the past. How often have we heard proposals for building met with pessimism because of regulatory hurdles or lost engineering prowess or an inadequate workforce? And yet, while some throw up a question mark, others are throwing down an exclamation point. Ask my guest, founder and CEO of California Forever, Jan Sramek. Jan says he's building the next great American city for factories of the future and workers that will run them. Now that's where the conversation begins, because there are many questions. How do you even begin to build a city from scratch? Which industries do you locate there? How do you attract workers? What's the right balance between government and business in making this happen? I'm Navin Girishankar, and on this episode of Betting on America, Jan and I are talking about how he's reimagining the American city and what it means for U.S. economic security. Jan, thank you so much for joining. I am very excited about this conversation. The more I learn about California Forever, your company, and what you're doing out in California, the more intriguing it is, and I think more in the policy community need to understand what it is you're trying to do. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You're doing something really audacious, bold, and exciting. You say you want to build the next great American city. And a lot of people talk about building, but you're actually doing it. And so I wanted to get into this in more detail. But first, let's start with your story, which is really quite interesting. Tell us first where you're originally from before you became an American, and then we can go from there about the city that you're building.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Czech Republic. I was born in 1987. The wall came down in 1989. And so I grew up in this really interesting period in post-Soviet Central Europe. And I think what's relevant for this project is I grew up with this very particular view of America and of California, which was the view that Hollywood very successfully I think promoted in the 90s. And the 90s was a deeply optimistic time in America, right?
Yeah.
We just won the Cold War. It was a massively optimistic time in California. And I wanted to come here my whole life. And then I finally made it to the UK and spent time in the UK and in Switzerland. And then I finally made it to California in 2013, which was a very different place than the place that I had grown up hearing about.
Tell us more.
Well, I was enamored with this idea of California as it used to be in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, right? It was the center of innovation in the world, computers, the internet, and it was also a place that built all of these incredible public works that became symbols for California and actually symbols for America.
Yeah.
The Golden Gate Bridge and the great water public works. And kind of California dream, and the California dream came before the American dream.
Yeah,
it was invented in the 50s, and then later it became the American dream. And so that's what I was expecting to find when I got here in 2013. But what I actually found was a place that still very much led the world in the digital world, in internet and mobile, and then later obviously in AI. But a place that had stopped building in the physical world. And the manifestation of it when I got here was there was soaring homelessness. Nobody could afford to live here. We were shutting down factories one after another. And companies wanted to grow here, but they couldn't. And I just thought that was profoundly sad.
Yeah. And that must have been startling coming from Eastern Europe to see that. And that was 10 years ago. So play that forward. Have things gotten better, worse?
I think they've gotten worse, and then they started getting better about a year or two ago. So, I mean, the timeline to me is I was kind of obsessed with this problem very quickly of how did we get here? How did California get here? How did this place that used to stand for being able to build the Golden Gate Bridge in 4 years and the home of the aerospace industry, get to a place where we couldn't build, where a train takes 20 years to build, and where a bike lane in California takes 20 years to build and costs $200 million. And eventually I decided to work on it. And when I started to work on it in 2016, my view was that it would get worse for a few years, and eventually it would come to a breaking point. And when enough companies leave the state and when enough kids can't afford to live at home and they move to Texas or Tennessee, the state would move towards the middle on a lot of the policies that have driven it. And kind of we would be there to build into that. And I was kind of expecting it to happen in 2020, 2021. I think COVID delayed it, but I would say starting in 2023, and especially this year, there's been a radical movement at both the city level and at the state level in California to simplify permitting and actually build a lot more, which is part of this much bigger renewal, I think, nationally of how do we build more.
So I want to get into that, but just a little bit more about yourself. What's your background? Are you an engineer? Are you a financier? What's your background? Because you have an incredibly complex project you're undertaking that combines engineering and finance and zoning and urban development. So what's your background educationally?
I'm a mathematician by training. And so they say mathematics is the queen of all of the sciences, and it's upstream of economics and it's upstream of engineering and physics. And I guess that's what they all have in common. But I studied mathematics at Trinity College in Cambridge and then at the London School of Economics. Then I spent 2 years in finance, which was actually very helpful to think through how you would finance building a city that takes tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to build out. And then I worked in technology for 4 or 5 years, including on kind of social networks. And there was a defining experience for me because a city is the original social network, right? Yeah. Cities are these original places where people come together, and by agglomerating them and making them all live in the same place, creativity and innovation and entertainment and all of these things flourish. And so I've had a weird career that in some way has led to where we are today.
Absolutely fascinating. And now you're part of a long tradition of an immigrant coming to the United States and doing bold things. And so I want to get into that. So let's talk about the next great American city that you're building with your company, California Forever. Tell us what you're doing in Solano County around this whole project.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, so I get here about 2013, 2014. I spent 2 years being obsessed with this problem of how do we build more in California and in America more broadly. At the time, you could kind of see re-industrialization beginning to show up. Some of the early companies are getting founded, obviously. Tesla and SpaceX is succeeding. And my sense after looking at whether we could just do this in existing cities is that California would need a massive new place to build more of everything, of homes, of factories, of offices, of things that we couldn't even imagine back in 2016. I discovered this incredible place called Solano County, which is the county about halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento. And it's not the Bay Area and it's not the Sacramento. It's this interesting bridge between the two places. And in it had this incredible open expanse of grazing land that was kind of a very odd thing to have in the middle of this Northern California mega region where there's 12 million people who live there. I came up with the idea of this would be an incredible place to build a new city. And I thought it was completely insane when I first had the idea, but I couldn't get it out of my head. So I spent about a year trying to convince myself it was a bad idea, and I couldn't find the fatal flaw. And then eventually I discovered these government reports going back to 1958, where the US Commerce Department and the Army Corps of Engineers wrote a study called The Future Development of the San Francisco Bay Area, 1958 through 2020. And in 1958, they correctly predicted that sometime around 2010 and 2020, there would be 2 new cities built in southeastern Solano County, where I thought we should build a city. And I found another report from a local regional agency that said the same thing, at which point I thought, well, this is probably not just Jan's crazy idea. This is some merit to it, and I decided to work on it. And so over the last 7 years, we've spent that time raising over $1 billion from leading investors and entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, like Mark Andreessen and Laureen Powell Jobs and Michael Moritz, Reid Hoffman, the Collison brothers, Nat Friedman and John Doerr. And then we've very patiently assembled this incredible landholding that at this point is about almost 70,000 acres. And I'll show you in a second what it looks like. But what it is it's this incredible place where California can build at a massive scale that is located in the heart of this larger region.
Yeah. I mean, that's just mind-boggling, especially looking back to the 50s to find reports that predicted that you would have to be at this point in time where you'd have to consider a new city. Not many people are in the business of building cities from scratch. But let me ask you something. At the core of it, what is your goal? Because the goal to build a city, or is the goal more fundamental than that, something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the most fundamental level, someone wrote an article about the project the other day, and she wrote in it, kind of, immigrants come to America with a vision of the country, and in my case, of California as a state as well, of what it is and what it should be, and we kind of latch onto that, and we want to fight for it being the case, right? There was a promise of California, and there was a promise of America, and after you get here, you kind of want to fight for it. And I think sometimes it takes an outsider or an immigrant to appreciate what makes a place special and just how rare it is. And to me, this combination of creativity and human talent and financial capital and openness to innovation and engineering talent and scientific talent that happened in the Bay Area in the last 100 years is really, really unique. I mean, governments all around the world have tried really, really hard to replicate it, and you can't. And I think it's only happened a handful of times in the history of the Western world. I would say Florence, Paris, London, New York, Chicago, the Bay Area, maybe LA, that's kind of it. And I just think it's profoundly, profoundly sad that we are letting that ecosystem and all of the opportunity that it creates kind of stagnate instead of supercharging it. I think it's a tragedy at a local level where it breaks the social fabrics of the community. It's a tragedy at the level of, think about California as this place that lifted literally tens of millions of Americans into the middle class.
Yeah.
I mean, you have tens of millions of Americans who moved to California to build a better life.
Right.
And we can do that. And then at a national level, this inability to build, which really started in California but has become a national issue, is, I think, the most un-American thing, one of the most un-American things that you can imagine. I mean, I think for 200 years, the country was defined by production and its ability to invent the future and then massively scale it and build it. And I think that frontier spirit and that spirit of we can build the future defined the optimism. And I think a lot of the social issues that you see today and that kind of bad mood and the fighting and the bickering is really a reflection of the fact that for the first time in the history of the country, parents look at their children and they don't think that the kids are going to have a better life than they are. And when that fundamental promise in society breaks, all kinds of bad things happen. And then lastly, obviously, in terms of great power competition right now with China, you look at these numbers, and I mean, I refused to believe them when I started to see the numbers for the first time. You hear numbers like, we would run out of ammunition in a conflict in the Pacific in 8 days. It will take us 10 years to replenish the stock of the weapons and systems that we've sent to Ukraine. China builds 1,000 ships a year and we build 5. Right. And you read it for the first time and you say, that can't be the case. Right. But then you look at it and actually it very much is the case. And so to me, this project is this incredibly difficult but very motivating endeavor that you can solve big social and national security and economic issues on a massive scale and build something really, really special that will last for hundreds of years.
Yeah, that's very powerfully stated, everything you just said. What I'm getting at is you're not building a city for its own sake. You've laid out, and I want to get into this when you show us your maps and walk us through this. You have a vision for certain industries thriving in this location. And so when you talk agglomeration, it's really about people and industries and opportunities coming together in a way that's self-reinforcing. Take us through this, and what industries do you have in mind here for your vision for Solano County?
So I'll take you through just a few slides. This shows Solano County and the landholding in the context of the whole region. So you can see here we have region from Silicon Valley all the way to Sacramento. In the heart of it is Solano County. And then the green is the 70,000 acres that we own in the area. So you can see the incredible scale to think big here in terms of the potential. The next slide just puts this into perspective. So that area is about 5 times the size of Manhattan. It's 2.5 times the size of San Francisco. It's bigger than the entirety of Washington, D.C.
Wow.
Meaningfully so, and bigger than the city of Seattle. And I think very importantly, I mentioned there's 12 million people who live in this region. You think about the workforce that you need to build whatever that we're building, it will be the 7th largest state in the country if this was a state. It is this missing piece of the innovation ecosystem in Silicon Valley. Right now, we invent the future here, but we used to build the future here. Lockheed Martin employed 35,000 people in the city of Sunnyvale.
Yeah.
We've let all of that decay. And I think that China has obviously built these massive innovation ecosystems, and they are all co-located, R&D and production. It's an issue if you're trying to invent the drone of the future in Menlo Park, but then you can't build it anywhere close to it. Importantly, when we talk about the competition with China and reindustrializing, we don't have enough people in America to throw at the problem to work in factories as they used to be. The only way you can compete is you build factories of the future where you have robotics and AI talent to actually supercharge the productivity per worker. All of the AI talent is in this area. And then, by the way, when you do that, that's also what allows you to pay people much more for working in a factory and have a better lifestyle and have a better job and a more interesting job.
Right.
Also, very importantly, this is in between 2 of the most important national security assets on the West Coast. In any conflict in the Pacific, the first 10% of the cargo that we send out there is going to fly through Travis Air Force Base, which is by far the largest air mobility base in America. And then the next 90% is going to come from the Marine Ocean Terminal Concord, where we have these roll-on roll of wharfs that you forward the material from. And so again, it's a really, really strategic location. There's a lot of universities and colleges in this area. But to get to the heart of your question of what we're building there. So there's 3 main components to what we're building. The Solano Foundry would be the largest dedicated advanced manufacturing park in America, a landing spot for all of those companies that do innovation in Silicon Valley, where they can build a factory that the engineers can get to in 80 minutes instead of a 3-day trip to fly to another state. Very important for the pace of innovation. The Solano shipyard, we can talk about a little bit more, but it basically is, according to everything that we've seen, the largest remaining, probably the only at this scale remaining site in America to build a shipyard on the scale of what is going on in Korea or in China.
Yeah.
And then Solano Living is a new downtown and new neighborhoods with 175,000 new homes where you could have the workforce live as well as all of the other people who need housing in California, which is a lot of people.
Yeah, amazing. And so when you think about those industries, how did you arrive at that? I think the shipbuilding is really a reflection of the geography, I think, is what you're describing. But there are some other things you mentioned, including the fabs and the kind of plug and play factory kind of model that you're describing, if I've described it correctly. How do you know that that's the industry that you want to cultivate there, that that's the regional avocation of Solano County?
Yeah, I mean, I think I start from thinking about how do these ecosystems emerge? And I think take a detour. Detroit worked not because we had GM and Ford in Detroit. It worked because we had all of the suppliers, and you had closely co-located R&D and production, including the entirety of the supply chain. And the same thing was true, for example, for shipbuilding in the Bay Area, where we built most of the ships during the Second World War, right? And then what happened in the 70s, 80s, and then particularly, well, 80s, 90s, and then particularly 2000s is China took all of those ideas, they basically stole them and they made them better
Right.
by building ecosystems like Shenzhen and Guangzhou, where you co-locate all of those things together. And we lost that in Silicon Valley because we priced out manufacturing out of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
As I said, Lockheed Martin employed 35,000 people in Sunnyvale. You can't do that when you run out of land and you run out of housing.
Yeah.
But what's very clear in this manufacturing renaissance in America that started 10 years ago is most of the R&D, or let me clarify that, a lot of the R&D still happens in Silicon Valley. A lot of the
Yeah.
new stuff is still getting invented there. But
Yeah.
right now what happens is company raises $20 million, they have 20 employees, they invent a new drone, they invent a new device of some kind. Then they go out and they raise $100 million and they need to go and build a factory to build it, the first factory. And they try really, really hard to build it in California because they know how important is it to co-locate production with R&D. And they can't because they can't find a piece of industrial land that is already entitled and ready to build, where there's workforce housing that is close to where they are, where they can get all of the utilities ready to it immediately. And so they put it somewhere else, but then all of those engineers spend days and days flying back and forth, which is a big issue for those companies. And we have the perfect location to do this because we have the land, we can provide the workforce housing. And importantly, this part of California is where the skilled trades manufacturing talent lives. There's 750,000 people who live within 50 miles of the site that you're looking at right now. But what they do in the morning is by the way, they work in manufacturing, they work in skilled trades, they work in logistics. And what they do in the morning is they get in a car at 4 a.m. in the morning and they drive to Menlo Park. It's completely insane. It's insane.
Yeah.
And then you have these companies where they have engineers in Silicon Valley who get on a plane and spend 6 hours traveling back and forth to some other US state.
Yeah.
Like, that's stupid. It's just bad for everyone.
You know
involved.
what strikes me,
And so
Jan, is that what strikes me, sorry to interrupt, is kind of a major failure of urban planning and economic development, a major failure. And it's striking that you as a CEO of a private company have identified this and are trying to solve it, using the tools that you have. You could easily have a similar conversation with people who are in government, either in the federal government or I presume in California state government, who have identified similar issues. And so the question I have for you is, you're doing this, you've acquired an immense amount of land to be able to do this at scale. What makes the difference between what you've done or been able to do versus a number of other government programs over the years that have attempted it and have not quite done it?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, so a couple of thoughts. The first one is, I actually think that it was a success. So it's our failure to implement urban plans that we had. So you and I talked about the studies from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s that called exactly for this. I mean, there's a report from the Association of Bay Area Governments called the Regional Plan 1970-1990. And it literally says, we should build new cities in this area that have at least 100,000 people so you can have a balance of jobs and housing. They wrote this in 1970. So we had all of the right ideas. We just forgot about them for this period of 40 years. But I think what's encouraging is that it's coming back very quickly. And now you've got leading kind of opinion leaders and academics calling for this to happen. Just today in the LA Times, Ed Glazer, who is one of the leading urban economists in the country, and Chris Elmendorf, who's a law professor and I think kind of an urban economist by virtue of that, at UC Davis, who's an expert on California regulations, wrote this op-ed that basically says, clear the path. Clear the path for California Forever and other projects because that's what the state needs. And so I think we're going back to implementing these plans because we had all of the right ideas. And by the way, those ideas all come from the time when California was the California that I came to, that I wanted to come to, that built these things, and that was the center of innovation, not just in the digital world, but in the physical world in America. And then to your second question, I think the biggest difference is when people have tried to start new cities, you can kind of, I think, you can kind of pick your problem in some sense. And so the challenge that we had is it took a long time to assemble the land. And there's obviously a big kind of political debate about how quickly it should happen and at what scale. But nobody is questioning that there's massive demand for factories or homes or even shipbuilding in this area. And so that's the path that we've chosen. I think when these efforts have failed, they have failed when someone has decided to build a city that is in the middle of the desert in New Mexico or in other places. I will say, even in those cases, often they have succeeded. I mean, notably, someone once decided to build a city next to the Great Lake in Utah in the middle of a desert. And today that's Salt Lake City. So often even these projects that look foolish in the beginning then become fantastic places that millions of people call home. But I think that's the biggest difference, is that we are building it in an area where basically nobody disagrees with the need for it.
Yeah, I think you said it well, because when you do look at those successes in the rearview mirror and say, oh, we built it and we build it and they will come, and it turned out to be Salt Lake City or whatever the place is, you're not looking at the cases where you've built it and they didn't come. So what you've pointed to is the agglomeration logic, the logic of linking this to clusters where proximity makes a difference. I think you've laid it out quite nicely. Let me add, a layer to this, because you touched on it, but I think it's hugely important, which is a big piece of what I've read about with California Forever's project is housing, like creating a place for the people who work in the factories of the future to live and work in proximity. Tell us more about this, because that's another big part of this whole story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of a practical level and then there's an ideological level to this. And so at a practical level, you need, I think I think part of the issue with getting Americans to work in factories is that we've gotten accustomed to a certain standard of what work is, and there's kind of social aspects that come with work and so on. And if you have a factory that's an hour outside of a city in an industrial park, and the only thing around is 2 fast food joints by the interchange, that's not a lifestyle that a lot of people aspire to, right? And so it's harder to recruit for it. Our take is there's no reason for why that should be the case. I mean, our factory is no longer, modern manufacturing is generally speaking a very clean industry. You don't need to locate it miles and miles away from residential. And so what we have in the plan, and you can see it if we go back to the slide for the Solano Foundry, is it's located adjacent to the neighborhoods. And so what that means is you can have an incredible lifestyle where you live in a walkable neighborhood that looks like Georgetown or Savannah, Georgia, or Charleston, South Carolina, medium density row houses, small apartment buildings. Yeah. And then you can get to your job in 10 or 15 minutes, and you can walk or bike, or you can drive if you want to. But then also, even inside the foundry, we've designed it to have communal squares and to have little plazas and to have places where people go out for drinks and have lunch. And so if you can provide a much more compelling way of living that brings the camaraderie and the social components that come with working in a downtown in an office job, it's a lot easier, I think, to get people to work in these companies, particularly in smaller companies. I mean, if you have some mega factory of 10,000 employees, you can provide that internally, but for smaller startups, you can't quite do that. The other thing that I would say is, I think part of what's gone wrong in America is that we have devalued skilled labor
Yeah.
at a cultural level in a way that is profoundly sad. It's coming back, but one of the things, if you look at the region in the world that maintains the highest proportion in the Western world of people who work in manufacturing, a lot of them are in Central Europe. It's places like Germany and the Czech Republic where I grew up. And one
Right.
of the defining things about my childhood is skilled labor was extremely highly respected in society, beyond money. I mean, it was much more prestigious to be a skilled electrician than to be a manager of a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And that is not the case in America, or it's becoming to be the case, and I'm really excited about it, but it wasn't for a long time. And people respond to those kinds of pressures. And so one of the things that we hope to do is to build a place that at a very deep cultural level values skilled work, whether you're building stuff in construction trades, whether you work in a factory, whether you work in the shipyard. It's just that sense of cultural respect and recognition of the importance of that work, which I think is going to attract certain kind of people and be a fantastic place to live. And then that kind of creates the virtuous loop where companies want to come and more people want to come and live there and so on.
Yeah, that's a powerful statement. It's one that seems to unite people in the reindustrialization movement, people in the abundance movement, left, right, left, whatever the political spectrum you're on. And that's really powerful. And there are new opportunities. I think of the AI infrastructure build out that we see underway. And we've done some work where the demand for skilled labor hasn't been as great as it's going to be with this AI infrastructure build out since probably World War II. And that's significant. So hopefully places like the one you're building create the venue for this stuff to actually materialize. The other piece that you mentioned, so you hit sort of fabs of the future, housing, co-location. You talked about shipbuilding. I've seen you make this presentation on other podcasts, but I'd love if you could do it here. Tell us about the shipbuilding component of what you're doing, and how does that compare relative to what we see in China?
Yeah, so shipbuilding, I will say shipbuilding wasn't in the plan in 2016 when we started. I mean, at the time, nobody was talking about shipbuilding, at least not in my circles. But it comes back to what I was saying about we wanted to build a place where you could build anything, and you don't even know in the beginning what you might need the space for. But kind of if you create this ecosystem, if it turns out that we need to build, I don't know, a new type of plane in 4 years, we want to be ready to build it. But the shipyard. So if we look back on this slide, what we knew in 2016 is that you can see that we have a coastline here on what's the place where the Sacramento River meets the San Francisco Bay. That's the blue area down there, and there's a waterway. That's a federally maintained water channel. That has been long. What I knew in 2016 is it was long designated for maritime industrial uses, basically, but never developed. Yeah. And then about 2 years ago, I started reading about the shipbuilding crisis, and nobody's talking about new shipyards. And I'm hearing about China builds 1,000 ships, we build 5. I'm like, you can't build 995 more ships in existing shipyards. I'm pretty sure they can double capacity or quadruple, but you can't do that. So we're gonna need some new places to build. And so we started working on it and getting in touch with people and saying, hey, we think we have an incredible site to build. What do you think? And they came in very skeptical, but what we've learned over the last 2 years of working with all of the maritime industrial stakeholders is that this probably is the best site to build in America. And the reasons for this are, if I look at some other slides, the way at a very structural level, the way that we think about the shipyard that we've learned is America needs a new shipyard, many new shipyards, but we particularly need a West Coast shipyard because the capacity that we have is largely on the East Coast and in the Gulf. We have a couple of shipyards on the West Coast, that's it. And obviously China is in the Pacific. And the obvious problem in any kind of a conflict is that Panama Canal is going to get shut down one way or the other. And then the ships can't come back for repair and new ships can't get out without going around Argentina, which is 17,000 miles. Right. And you need refueling along the way for most types of ships. And all kinds of challenges happen with that. Which is so why do we not have any West Coast shipyards? We have a couple. We used to have 6 shipyards in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
During the Second World War, where we built ships, most ships in America were built in the Bay Area. It was Treasure Island, Hunters Point, Marin Ship, Richmond, Mare Island. But then in the 90s, we shut them all down for various reasons, political and otherwise. Now, the reason why we had 6 shipyards in the Bay Area is it's the best natural harbor in America.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense to have a shipyard here. And most of the sites that we shut down are now condos and coffee shops. So we can't go back even if we wanted to. But this is an incredible place, and it's incredible because of the scale of it. So people might have heard the headline of there's one shipyard in China that built more ships.
Right.
Actually, it's not a headline. It's you guys who wrote it. I think this
Right.
was CSIS who wrote this.
Right.
Jiangxing Island in China built more ships last year than we have built in America since the end of the Second World War in all of our shipyards.
Yep.
That's the bad news. The good news is Jiangxing Island looks kind of small when you look at it in the context of the Solano land holding. It's about 3,200 acres. The Solano shipyard reservation is about 7,500 acres. And so if we decide as a country to actually build new shipyards, which we haven't done yet, we've talked about it and we've upped the capacity in the existing ones. This is an incredible place to build that both happens to be on the Pacific, which is very rare, is massive, and that it has all of these other properties like it's on a deep water ship channel. There's tons of workforce in the area, which is not the case in Northern California further up, and it's not the case in coastal Oregon, and it's not the case in coastal Washington. Cal Maritime is in Vallejo, about 20 miles away from the site. That's the last remaining maritime academy on the West Coast. There's a railhead that goes all the way to the shipyard. One of the reasons for why it's difficult in America to build new dry docks is that both Pearl Harbor and the Bremerton shipyard sit on top of massive earthquake fault lines. So it's really, really expensive to build a dry dock when you have both sideways and upside down shaking in an earthquake. It adds billions and billions of dollars to the cost. Believe it or not, there isn't a single active earthquake fault line that runs through the entirety of not just the shipyard, but the 70,000 acres.
Amazing.
It's this really, really incredible unicorn site. By the way, what's on the site today is a bunch of windmills that are very old, that need to come out at some point, that are 20 years old. Those windmills are up to 600 feet tall. And a Goliath crane that you need for modern shipbuilding is about 400 feet tall. So the fact that you can put windmills on this site cost effectively for that to pay for itself just tells you a lot about how simple and easy it is to build on this site from a geological and earthquakes and other perspectives. And as you can see, it's right on the deepwater ship channel. The ship that we see here is a Panamax class ship that's the size of a modern destroyer or a battleship. And so really, really incredible place to build. And we're excited about all of the discussions that are happening about it right now with all kinds of different maritime industrial-based stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the discussions on Capitol Hill around legislation for ships is kind of apropos to what you're describing, as well as the negotiations with partners like South Korea, where they have shipbuilding capability, and now an FDI and foreign direct investment attraction program with the Trump administration. So it's very interesting. This could be a constellation of factors that reinforce the kind of thing you're talking about, around the reindustrialization agenda across the country. Let me rapid fire a few questions just so I make sure that we hit this for the audience. What you're describing, very interestingly enough, is something like a special economic zone type exercise that you see in East Asia. You mentioned China. Certainly you see it in Southeast Asia. You see it, even some versions of it in Europe. We haven't had that in this country in a long time. We've largely let things happen organically. But in a sense, what you're doing as a private company is providing that service. It seems to me, maybe it's a question for you. Are you not providing the service that like a special economic zone manager provides in other countries? the conveyancing of, like the provision of services in a streamlined way, conveyanced land, maybe a plug-and-play type of factory. Like you're providing all this in a way that makes it much easier for companies to agglomerate. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one way of putting it, and I think what's the couple of different parts to this. So one thing is we playing the role of a master developer, and so what we did is we acquired the land, we are entitling it, we are designing it, we're going to provide the infrastructure, and then we're going to deliver both kind of finished buildings or finished lots to other people who will build the buildings. But obviously, we have a huge incentive to make the whole ecosystem work, and so we don't think about it as kind of there's some housing, there's a factory, but we think about how it all works together. I would say what we are doing is on the permitting front, we can do a lot of the things that a special economic zone does without actually being a special economic zone, where we basically doing the permitting at a wholesale big scale. And so using existing systems that exist in California, that don't require any kind of special changes to legislation. We basically permitting the entirety of the Solano Foundry and the Solano Living component of this as one massive master planned community. And so what that means is if you think about the steps that you have to get through to build a factory, there's maybe 9 steps in the process in California. There's a general plan, there's zoning, the water board, the air resources board, you need a development agreement, and we kind of doing the first 8 of them up front, and we creating this envelope where we say, we're going to have a big discussion about whether we should build this. We're going to do a gigantic environmental study that's going to be 15,000 pages long. And we're going to pre-clear 100 million square feet of industrial and commercial space, 175,000 homes. And what that means is if someone wants to come and build a factory, because we've already cleared it, they can just get a building permit in 60 or 90 days from the city. And so we can, to me, the exciting thing about this is we can do it using existing tools and then still deliver that result of very streamlined permitting so that companies can build quickly, so that home builders can build quickly, which means they can deliver the homes at a more affordable price point. The other component of it, I think, is there's obviously discussions about opportunity zones and maritime prosperity zones that would kind of supercharge these efforts with fiscal incentives.
Right.
And I think this would be an excellent place for one of those in California, where clearly this can happen at a massive scale, and creating an incentive for companies to come here would obviously accelerate those efforts. So I think it's a really good candidate for something like this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is it the scale that allows you to do what you're doing?
Yeah, I think scale is, I think in urban development, scale is a key feature that unlocks a lot of things that make it work. One simple one is just you remove the coordination overhead. I mean, imagine if you had 50 different landowners trying to negotiate something like this, it wouldn't be able to move.
Right.
I also think it allows you to subsidize the things that you need to subsidize in the early days to make it work. So for example, we might, or probably we will, subsidize some of the early companies who come to build factories, or some of the early shipbuilders. They might get better terms on the land or the utilities in order to come to the city. Standalone developer wouldn't do that. Similarly, on the housing front, we'll probably subsidize the first few coffee shops and restaurants and a grocery store and schools. It also allows us to think long-term about issues like infrastructure. And so what we've said is, if someone is coming to a community to build 200 homes, they don't really care what happens once they've sold home number 200. And so if the roads start crumbling or the school is bad, they kind of want to sell their homes and then they are gone. We're going to be here for half a century. Yeah. I mean, I hope to be there for half a century. I hope this is the last job that I ever have. Mm-hmm. And so we have a real incentive to do a good job because we are there to stay. And if we do a great job, we get a lot of community buy-in and support. And obviously, the value of the overall project goes up. If we do a bad job on any front, then we hear it and we bear the costs of it. And so I think for something like this, having an entity that is set up and funded to be there for a long time is really, really valuable.
Yeah. Let's just talk about opposition you've faced along the way for a moment, because I think it's important to highlight some of the challenges in doing something of this scale, whether it's criticism that, you're funded by, a number of tech billionaires, and is this sort of inclusive of the communities around, environmental issues that people have raised, other voters, like NIMBYism of various kinds.
Mm-hmm.
Take us through like some of those obstacles you faced and how you've overcome them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key part to this is, I mentioned earlier, when I had the idea to build this here, my first reaction was, that's an amazing idea. My second reaction was, this is completely crazy. If this was a good idea, someone would have done it already. And so then I spent 7 months, or almost a year actually, listing 75 reasons for why it wouldn't work. Transportation, water, rare species, agriculture, political buy-in, you name it, basically. And the fact that I decided to do it at the end of it meant that I thought that we had a pretty good answer for all of those. And so what I and we told the community and everyone when this came out is, we said, just keep an open mind. We understand you have a laundry list of items of what your concerns, but let's just work through them one by one, and you're gonna see that we have decent answers for all of this, excellent answers for some of them, and this is going to work. And I would say that's basically what's transpired over the last 2 years. And so when this came out, it was very controversial. And now if you look at it, this has massive community support. It's backed by opinion leaders across industrialization and housing and abundance and academics and politicians. And it's a reflection of the fact that deep down, it's a really, really good idea.
Yeah.
And so if I take some of the criticisms kind of one by one, just to kind of have 3 examples. On the investor front, I always laughed when people attacked the investors for investing in this. The liberal media spent 6 years writing about how billionaires shouldn't fund stupid messaging apps. They should really take their money and invest in real world companies that make lives better for real Americans and solve real deep challenges. Right. That whole time, by the way, I was raising money and convincing these people to take a bet on this massive 40-year idea that was very risky, that no bank or private equity fund would ever fund, right? And then we came out, and the same journalists who've been doing that started criticizing it. It was like, pick your side. Like, you called for billionaires to invest in America. These are people investing in America. So that's one example. Another one is, I was very convinced this is the right place to build, because there are government reports that basically conclude this is the least agriculturally productive region within 300 miles.
Yeah.
And it's the least, and it has basically no ecological diversity. These are county documents that say we have a lot of places in California that are worth protecting. This isn't one of them. And so that concern, kind of, if we're gonna build anywhere, this is a much better place to build than anywhere else. Right. And then on the community front, I think there was a concern in the beginning that we would come in and we wouldn't work with people, and we would kind of do whatever we wanted or try to force it through whatever means was necessary. And I said, that's not the case. We just care about building a great place. We're doing this because we did a lot of research. I've spoken to a bunch of people. We've done a lot of polling. We've done a lot of focus groups. And what people told us is, we need more jobs in Solano County. We need more homes in Solano County. And we don't want to be a bedroom community for the Bay Area. We have a lot of pride in this county and what it can do. And this used to be a place, I mean, Mare Island was the first shipyard on the West Coast before it shut down. That's in Solano County. And so I think the community came into it with some skepticism, which I understand. If a guy with a weird accent and a bunch of tech people come into the community. But what they've seen over the last 2 years is we mean it. We're pretty serious about it. We care about doing a great job, and we've been good partners. And I think that the support that you see for it right now is a reflection of that. And now the opposition is reduced to basically a bunch of radical, no-growth, fanatical environmentalists who think that people shouldn't have kids because we have too many people in the world.
Let me end with this question, because I'm very interested in the replicability of this across the country, because there are a number of opportunities for reindustrialization, for developing our technological capabilities, our rebuilding our industrial base. Is what you're doing a model, or even are there lessons learned from it that could be applied, even in cases where you do not achieve the scale that you have?
Yeah, I think definitely. I do think this is a unique site given the sheer size of it. I mean, it's hard to find 70,000 acres an hour outside of a major metro area, even in places like Texas where you would expect to find it. It's actually hard to find 2,000 acres an hour outside of Dallas or Austin. And then the location next to Silicon Valley is really unique. But I do think, so with that caveat, I think the idea of master developments that are thoughtfully planned to address the particular issues in a given location definitely scales. And there's a version of it that's kind of industrial ecosystems. And I think designing kind of industrial parks that are located close to new housing across the country is a pretty good idea. I mean, it's a, as you said, it's a bipartisan issue that we need new homes in America. It's a bipartisan issue that we need a lot more factories in America. We should be building them close to each other because you need to offer a much better quality of life to people who work there. I also think that one of the part of how we building a place that has medium density, which is normally difficult, is because of our scale, we can subsidize the early retail, we can subsidize the schools, we can subsidize the early development on the housing front. Allowing development to happen at a bigger scale where someone can take a longer term view, I think is a good thing that built many of the actually cities and neighborhoods in America before. We have good examples for this. Reston and Columbia in the DC area are both master plan cities from the last generation of them from the 60s. Irvine in Southern California, which obviously is a location of a lot of the defense companies still to this day, it was another planned city. Irvine started in the 60s with 90,000 acres of land, and they developed about 45,000 over the last 60 years. It's one of the best places to live in America. It's a different kind of a community than what we're building, but it's a best-in-class suburban community, and they have more jobs than they have residents. So I think there's lessons that, when done right, these master plan developments can be really successful.
Yeah. This is absolutely fascinating. Listen, I think you refer to yourself as a person with a funny accent, but let me tell you something. It's really amazing to see an immigrant come to America and remind Americans of what they used to be able to do. And isn't that the essence of what this country is about? So I just have to applaud what you're doing. And it's also a strong case for experimentation, figuring out new ways of doing those things that we need to be able to do. And I take this whole conversation in the spirit of that kind of desire to experiment and find new ways, being pragmatic and hitting the goal. So I wish you all the success in what you're trying to do there. And thank you for taking the time to join us.
That means a lot, actually. I really appreciate you saying it. And I will say the writing by CSIS and by you has been a very influential component of how we've shaped the industrial strategy and the focus on shipbuilding. So it was coming full circle to be here today. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. And thank you for listening to this inspiring conversation with Jan Sramek, founder and CEO of California Forever. You can find this episode and more on csis.org, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Navin Girishankar reminding you that everyone has a role to play in winning the tech race.